Why we believe Jesus is God. I want us to take a look at three passages that demonstrate for us from the scriptures that Jesus is God. Let's take a look at those together. The first one is in John chapter 1, and we're going to see what the word means. So, John chapter 1, beginning in verse 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. And when you look on down in verse 14, we read, The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. John starts his gospel by telling us that in the beginning was the Word. You know, it's very similar to Genesis 1:1 that starts off that in the beginning God. Well, John is writing about his experience in the New Testament times, that things are going to be made new, and a lot of that starts with Jesus Christ. And here, in the beginning was the Word. We find out that this Word was God. We find out this Word was with God. We find out that this Word created all things. When you look at Genesis 1, you find out who created all things. It's God. When you look here in this, you find out it's the Word. Well, what does that mean? In verse 14, we see that earlier it was even stated the Word was God, but now we see in verse 14 that Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. Make no mistake of it. We see this Word is Jesus Christ. He is the one who was made flesh and lived among human beings. We see that the Word is God, and Jesus Christ is God. There's more passages, though. Let's turn to the book of Hebrews now. In Hebrews chapter 1, we find out that Jesus, being the Son, he is greater than the angels. Hebrews chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. After he had provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven. So he became as much superior to the angels as the name he has inherited is superior to theirs. Look at verse 6 now. And again, when God brings his firstborn into the world, he says, Let all God's angels worship him. Once again, we see that it's through the hand of Jesus Christ that God is able to make all things that we see around us. Jesus is the creator God that we read about in the beginning in Genesis 1:1. We also see from verse 6 that all of God's angels are called to worship Jesus Christ. If the angels of God are called to worship Jesus Christ, then shouldn't we be also called to worship Jesus Christ as well? Well, the third passage specifically talks about that. Let's go now to the end of Matthew's gospel. In Matthew chapter 28, we find out that Jesus himself, he has all authority. By the way, who has all authority except for God himself? Matthew 28, verses 16 through 20. Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Then Jesus came to them and said, All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age. And with these words, Matthew ends his gospel. And we also know that what happened right after this is that Jesus himself ascended up into heaven. And we see from this passage, when you even look at how the disciples responded in verse 17, they worshiped Jesus. Now, that would be unthinkable, except for the fact that they knew Jesus is God. Just like we have to accept that fact that Jesus is God. Jesus is worthy of our worship. He has been given all of this authority. What does he do with that authority? Well, he asks us. He specifically asks those 11 disciples, but he also asks us to go and to make disciples, to teach them about all of these things, to baptize them, and then to continue to teach them everything that Jesus has taught the disciples. That's kind of this endless cycle that we have been given until Christ returns. And we also find out, along with all of these promises and along with this authority and along with this command, is that Jesus is going to be with us always to the very end of the age. Wonderful blessings. a man who was more than just a man, but is also God himself in the flesh.